Awesome. All right, well, it's 8 o'clock now. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We've had Mike on once before, and a lot of you will be familiar with him and his flies from his days tying in the shop too. Mike is from Thunder Bay, but often visits Toronto, has spent a good number of hours in the shop just tying for the fun of it and chatting up a lot of you, I know. So we're really privileged to know Mike. He's definitely one of the best steelhead tires going these days, I think. There's a wealth of information on a lot of things. Last time we did we did a shank and a tube fly, I think, if I remember right. So this time,
I think they were more contemporary flies. There was like a hobo-ish thing.
2 shanks, that's right.
Yeah. And then one with rabbit, which are really effective. But today we'll do something a little more classic, sort of. Well, actually, not entirely classic, because a lot of these steelhead spay flies are, modern in a sense, like 50s on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people think of them as classic, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I haven't been really around really that long. I mean, Thunder and Lightning, you look at something like that, second fly we're going to tie, and a version has been around for some time, but maybe not as you're going to tie it. So.
Yeah, I actually might even do it first.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, I might even do it first, because I can do the body a little more like a traditional spay fly, right? With just sort of like fur or wool. Like originally the spay flies were very bland, right? But they're not much different than this in the sense that they're just a body that's usually pretty bland, a lot of olives and sometimes some browns, and they were done with wool. And they just wrapped wool around the shank, and then they ribbed it rather intricately and put a hackle on, almost very similar to this. And then they put a wing of, traditionally it was usually just Bruns mallard or shoulder of a mallard duck. And it didn't have a tail. And so we can do one that's quite similar to that. In fact, this one is, and also this one is. They're really straightforward in terms of materials. But they can be sometimes tricky in terms of getting things set right in proportions. And this one is really no different than the other. It's just a body with easy to come by schlappen for a hackle. And we have some silver tinsel ribbing. And then we have a throat. In this case, it's guinea. I put a little bit of heron on this one just for fun, but you don't need to. Really, you just need the schlappen, you need a throat, and you need a wing.
Yeah.
And you can get a beautiful fishy spay fly. This one's worked really well for me. This one, I love this one.
I bet. Well, I know you love your sunburst.
Yeah. I this one's a fluorescent orange that I picked up in your shop. But when we talk about hackle tip wings, they started to be used more in the sort of 50s. On the West Coast. So when we go to hackle tip spay flies, I mean, some of the older ones were done. There's one called, I did one just really recently that there was an old traditional salmon fly that had a wing like this. But the hackle tip wings were used a lot more on the West Coast. And this kind of thing, you grab a hackle, you choose a few feathers, and I've got some here. You can get them in the shop. I think you sell the Wapsie ones, don't you, Chris?
Yeah, they're pretty inexpensive. They're $20 for a whole cape or so, and keep going for some time.
And when you buy an expensive one, you don't necessarily get anything better. Mm-hmm. In fact, I bought this one a long time ago. It was a little bit more expensive, but I find it trickier to work with, because when you sometimes get these more expensive ones, they have very much thicker stems. And what I like about some of the less expensive necks is the stem in the middle is a little softer, which makes it easier to get it on here without twisting. Mm-hmm. But every neck is different, and it takes a little time to sort of figure out how to work with them. And there's a few tricks to get them to sort of lay down. Sometimes you'll see hackle tip wings and they're sticking up like this on people's flies. And there's ways to avoid that. And I thought we could go over some of that today. And I've heard people say that you have to get hackles or necks that have the correct curve. Well, that helps a bit, but a lot of it has to do with what you're doing up in this section of the fly in order to get the wing to set, you know, the way that you like. I like them to lay down. I like them the proportions to be. This one's a little on the longer side. This wing. It's coming just as you can see past the bend of the hook. I don't like it to go any further than that. Sometimes people just like to keep it just inside the bend of the hook. But that's, you know, your tie, your rules. But we can get started. And if anybody has a question, just throw it out there.
Yeah, we'll go through that. As a quick reminder to everybody just going through this, you're very welcome to ask questions. I encourage you to do so. If you don't mind, keep yourself muted and use the chat box for those questions, and we'll just address them as they come up. So yeah, Mike, if you want to get going, let's do it. And by all means, a little bit about maybe history and flies too.
And more questions, the merrier. These ones are done on what's called a Spay Hook. And a Spay Hook is just sort of a longer shanked hook, a little bit curvier. And the best one for you to work with is this one. I'm going to tie on one slightly bigger because it just might be easier to see. But this is an Alec Jackson, and it's a 2051. I like them in black. They also sell one that's a little bit heavier wire, and that one tends not to be quite as sharp. This one's a really sharp hook. They can be a little brittle sometimes, but overall, they're a great hook, and they were used for a long, long time. They're still pretty readily available. They also make it in a size 3, which I like. This is a 1.5. They make it in a 3, which is a little bit smaller, and then they make it in a 3/0, which is, I find, way too big. But this hook that I'm going to tie on is almost exactly the same, as you can see that, but it's just ever so slightly bigger. And I think that it'll just be a little bit easier for the camera. But an AJ 1.5 is what I tie an awful lot of these on. In fact, these ones that I showed you at the beginning are all tied on AJ 1.5s. And again, that's the 2051. They also have an AJ steelhead iron that I'm not a big fan of. It's very curvy and it's much shorter. You want this one that comes out here a little longer. So this is an almost identical hook, but it's just a tiny bit bigger. And I'm going to use just some black thread for now on this one. And I'm going to put my good glasses on. I can't see. These ones I can't see very far in, but at least I can see closer. And I'm going to just wind back here. I don't need to be careful about keeping all my thread wraps right beside each other, because on this one, I'm not going to do any floss at the back. If you're going to be doing floss at the back, it helps to keep your thread wraps really close together. And I'll explain that later, but I'm going to let that hang right here. And I'm going to get that nice and flat. And I like to start these almost exactly at the point. On a lot of salmon flies, you come back further and you go to the barb, but these ones have a pretty curvy shank. And if you go down here, it almost looks a little funny. So we want to be just on this curved part where I start, and it's almost exactly there. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to put down our tinsel ribs. And this is kind of interesting. I'm going to tie them like my tinsel. I'm going to tie it right underneath the shank here, like this. And it's going to be sticking right out the end. And then I'm going to wind it. And I'm going to use two tinsels. So there's a reason for that. One is oval and one is flat. And when I'm done, I want my flat tinsel, my oval tinsel, and I want my hackle to be right beside each other like that with no gaps. And I want them underneath the shank. And I don't know how I can show that any better than doing that. But that's really key, is that you don't have them all like this, okay? And we're going to tie them in just like that, flat under the shank. And the one that you wrap first is the one that you want furthest away from you. And I know that seems a little bit funny, but I'm going to just pull out some tinsel here. There's a piece of flat tinsel, and I'm going to put that underneath. And this is the one I'm going to wrap first. So it's actually going to be closest to me with the hook upside down. I'm going to put that there, and then I'm going to get some oval. You can use any brand of tinsel that you like. I have just what's available. And then right here, I'm going to put one more like that. And then I'm going to try to get a schlappen feather. Now the schlappen feathers are what we're going to use for hackle here. I'm going to just talk about that for 1 sec. You want to choose a nice long one. I've chosen a whole bunch of them here. I like this one. It's a little bit thinner stemmed. And we're going to prep it by stripping one side. If you don't strip one side, the hackle can be a little too thick. So what I would do is strip one side, but which side do we strip? Well, if you see the curvy part of the hackle, all right, when I have the hackle curves kind of going away from me, in other words, I'm looking at what I call the front of the hackle, I want to strip the right side of this for this one. And I'm going to pull those hackle feathers all off the right side like this. And that's how you prepare a hackle. And we're going to tie it in like this so that it winds and all of these fibers start to sort of, as you can see,
a little off.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
We're going to wind it and have them kind of poke backwards. So I'm going to try to do that. Now, the problem is with some of these schlappen feathers is the stem can get thick. And if it gets too thick, when you go to wind it, it'll actually break off because they're brittle. So it does help, and I actually did that to some of these earlier. It does help to soak them in a bit of water, but I'm going to just now come in and put this one here. And it should go in like that. And I'm trying to make sure, like I said, that all of those are right tight together. There we go. And I'm just going to this time bring all of these. Okay, here we go. That one's got to just twist. I'm going to try to bring them all along almost the bottom of the shank here. Okay. And if I'm doing this properly, I should put every thread wrap right beside the one that I just wrapped. And the reason for that, it's a good habit to get into because then everything is smooth if you go to do a floss body later, okay? Now, I'm gonna probably put some fur here, or if you're using wool, then it'll cover up any bumps. But if you're going to be doing floss work, it's a really good habit to have all of your thread wraps really close together. Now, it looks really boring. I'm gonna speed that up. And we don't need to be perfect here, so I can just wind these all the way up to the front. How's that on camera, Chris? Pretty good?
Yes, pretty good. Well, I would mention when you're like working with your hands right on the hook, it's good for focus. When you come away, even as you're just wrapping with your bobbin, it goes soft. If it's a little low right now, if you're able to center the vise a little bit better, it might have an easier time sticking to it.
How's that?
I don't know if there's any way to tilt the camera down just ever so slightly without screwing everything up. Yeah, that's more centered there. Let's see if that sticks on it better. I think it likes following your face otherwise. We'll see. Yeah.
That better?
Very nice right now.
Okay. So there's a tiny gap that I have between the, where I actually have a gap between the hackle that I tied in and the tinsels. I haven't got them perfectly lined beside each other, as I explained earlier, but I can get away with it on this one. If I was doing something really fancy, I would probably redo what I just did, but for fishing flies, it's not the end of the world. And I'm gonna just try to get things out of the way, and then we're gonna put a body on here, and then we're gonna wind these all forward over the body. Not much different in some ways than a woolly bugger. But I'm gonna build this out of seal fur. I have some black seal fur here because we have a black body on this. This fly, this pattern, essentially is a black body and an orange hackle with a wing that used to be bronze mallard, but now we're doing it with black or dark wing. But the throat is usually blue, and it's blue guinea. I think originally it was blue jay. But if you can do a fly with a black body, with a tinsel rib, with an orange hackle, and I'm just spinning some black on here for my body, with an orange hackle and a blue throat, that's essentially what we call the thunder and lightning kind of colors. And sometimes people call it a T and L, or thunder and lightning, and they'll say thunder and lightning variant. And there's a million of them. People do them with little hair wings. People do them with streamers. People do them as traditional salmon flies. And I'm going to just put this in a loop and spin a little seal dubbing on here. These are really great things to have, these dubbing spinners. This one is one that I picked up, and I think I got it in the shop, Chris. It's probably one of the most useful tools ever. And we just, oh, I'm going to come really close to that camera here doing this. A little bit long, so maybe I can cheat. I don't usually do a rotary vise thing, but I will. How's that?
You're natural.
I'm not used to doing this. In fact, I haven't, see how it, every time you wind, you got to unwind these threads. Some people use a rotary vise like steadily. I only ever bought one just so I can see underneath. And lately I have actually not even been using a vise for some of my stuff. So I'm a little bit vise out of shape here, so to speak. But there we go. It's working out. It's working out nice. But I'm just putting on a body here of just rough, scruffy seal fur in black. And you can use any dubbing you want. But the next thing here is I don't want to come up here too far. If I come up here too far, I'm going to get into a real problem. I want to thin it down here. And that's enormously important, is to thin this down so that I don't have too much up at this point. I'm going to tie it off. But if you go too far up and you have too much dubbing or fur or body material, or it's too thick here, up to this point here, and you've got a lot of material, that is one of the #1 things that messes up your wing. I know that seems weird, because you actually start to create what's called a ski ramp here. And what I want is everything to go back. And if I've got a big bump here, it's going to push things up. Intruders actually they put the bump there on purpose to push things up. But I'm trying to really avoid that now. And I may want to come just a little further. In fact, I will. I'm going to do this one right. That's way too much wax. I'm going to put a tiny little bit more at the front here, because I think I need to come just a trace further forward. And the other thing you'll find when you're tying these is it takes a little time to do a few before you realize when to stop. Sometimes I often come too far forward, and then I crowd my head and I don't have room to finish the fly. That happens sometimes, and just practice and experience is the way to get through there. So now we're going to wind these, and the one furthest away from me is this tinsel here. I'm going to wind it first, and I'm going to come up with
flat tinsel.
Yeah, that's my flat.
And
furthest away.
Yeah, well, I was going to say.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to clarify. So the tinsel was tied in. The flat tinsel is the furthest away from you. The oval tinsel's in the middle, and the hackle is closest to you, right?
Absolutely, and they're exactly beside each other, and there's no space. All right, and I'm trying to do about 4 or 5 turns here of tinsel. 5 is standard. Sometimes people do big open turns if they don't want too much hackle. I like about 5, and there's my 5th one right there. But I'm just going to come through here and I'm going to finish it off and tie it. And I like to tie things off underneath the hook shank. I didn't talk though enough about this. You may have seen I've been putting some wax on my thread. And the number one thing you can do too to improve some of your tying on these flies is by using some really good tying wax. Beeswax works well too, and maybe even some candle wax, but it's not dubbing wax. Dubbing wax is kind of a wet, sticky thing, but this is just like candle wax, and it goes in and becomes like a rock and binds things down. And it really helps your thread from stops your thread from slipping and holds things perfectly. So I just snipped that off. Now we're going to try to pull this oval up, and we're going to put the oval just behind the flat. And that's actually a really common sort of standard thing that you see a lot in salmon fly tying, and certainly in this type, is this oval tinsel will go right snug up behind the flat. And the key here is to put it on top of the oval and have it just on top of the flat and have it slide off. And then on top of the flat, and I'll use this rotary technique again, and then let it slide off. I don't know if you can see that happening. There we go. A little bit of a gap there. You don't want gaps if you can avoid it. And I'm also putting lots of extra wraps up at the head here, Chris. So I had to remember to undo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. And now that wax on this thread will just bind this next one down really tight. There, almost with just 2 wraps. I'll put 3 in. And that's held pretty tight. Now, oval tinsel is great because you can snip it off here like that. And then with your fingers, I don't know if you can see, I'm just going to strip it off. And the stuff strips off a core, and then you can just snip it. And then with a touch more wax, I'm going to bind that down. There. Okay, so I've got a pretty good body for me. I don't see any gaps, so I'm liking that. Now the hackle will then come up and it will go snug behind the oval. And you can just pull it right up behind the oval like this. Okay, see how we're almost winding like a woolly bugger? You can do that. Sometimes people like to put 1 turn at the back, and I actually like to do that. I like to put 1 turn at the back and then just come over that oval. And then I'm gonna do this rotary thing again and come right up snug with no gaps. And this hackle will float back beautifully. It looks like it's sticking forward and up, but actually that's nice because it comes up and then back and is a beautiful sort of propped up hackle, and it fishes really well that way. And here we go. And here's my orange on black. And that right there is pretty much all a Spay body is. It's a hackle over top of a wool or seal fur body that's right tucked in behind ribbing. Sometimes people will cross rib. They'll put a rib and wind it across and through the hackle to stabilize it. But this way, you actually don't need to, because the hackle gets buried and protected behind the oval tinsel that's actually above it, right? It tucks right into the fur and is snug in behind the oval, and it's protected from the teeth of the fish. So I'm gonna just stroke that back a little bit like that, and that's gonna be beautiful there. And I've got lots of room up at the front here. You guys still with me, Chris?
Yep.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure because I have had tech issues in the past. And I'm going to just continue to make sure that there's wax on my thread at this point, because I do not want my fly coming undone. And wax holds everything in just like cement. some tyers keep a piece on their finger right here. They actually have it on their finger, and then it stays warm, and they're just constantly rubbing it on the thread. But I like to just grab a piece and rub it on. So at this point,
remove after.
What's that?
I find it's not fun to remove from the finger after if you do it that way.
Is that what, have you done that, Chris?
Yeah, it gets all, like you can take it off easy enough, but it leaves like a residue stuck to your finger. It's hard to wash off too because it's wax. It's repellent.
Yeah, I don't like doing that. But there's people that swear by it, and especially people that are tying these and cranking them out like those, like little beautiful little hair wings, and they've got to tie a million of them. They're just constantly putting it on. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just be conscious of the fact that I don't have too much room here. I need to get a head. I need to set a wing, and I can actually put 2 hackles. So I'm going to come back 1 turn, and that's just going to really stabilize that orange. And for fun, I soaked a heron hackle. I will do heron. I like to soak my heron hackles so that the stem doesn't break when I wrap them. And this one is a really deep blue. I would use a black or a deep blue, and I went with this one. It's a really deep blue. I got it in the shop. And there's 2 kinds of heron. There's a gray heron that you can get dyed, and then there's a brown heron that you can get dyed. And this is brown heron, and it's much more spindly, and there's not as many fibers on the stem. A gray heron has way more fibers on the stem, and it's almost important to strip the hackle, just like we did here.
Do you have a gray heron hackle available? Just to show.
I have one, but I'm going to have to go and look for it. But I'll find one.
That's all right. Yeah, I think people can envision like the fibers are very clumpy.
Yeah, and I love it for things like Lady Caroline, for a fly very similar to this that you're doing in a very similar way called a orange heron, which are some of the Sid Glasso flies. Mm-hmm. Those ones use gray heron. And so now I'm just folding this back, right? And I soaked this earlier, so the stem is fairly moist and it shouldn't crack on me, just like it didn't crack on me back here. And I don't want too many turns. I'm just putting a couple of in here. I'm not even using pliers to do this. I've become a real hands-on tyer, so don't be afraid to get your hands in there and do things. So I'm going to tie it off underneath here with 1 turn, 2 turns, and 3 turns, and snip that. So there we go. There's a little bit of black right there.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of the patterns that include gray heron, it's typically like the dominant hackle in the pattern versus an addition like what you just did.
Yeah, it might have a teal throat.
Yeah, or it would be the body hackle instead of the schlappen, say, just because it's so present and bold.
It's very different. It's very different. It's got very different properties. I like them both, but for some of these flies, I like to use a kind of spindly little brown heron that's been dyed, as opposed to gray heron that's been dyed. Now, here we go. Now we go to guinea. Guinea's the collar on this one. Guinea's great stuff, but it can be tricky to wrap. I chose one that has a fairly thin stem. Some of them have really thick stems, and that can cause them to twist and do funny things. But we're gonna, did I even prep another one? No, I'm gonna do this one. Now I can strip one side if I want, or I can not strip one side. It doesn't really matter. I think what I'll do is, I think I'll strip this side. Now I'm going in by the tip this time. So I'm gonna strip the left side off. The other time I tied in by the butt, and I didn't really emphasize that enough. But when we did this hackle, the orange one, I tied it in by the butt and wind forward. So, sometimes you'll see things tied in by the tip and wound forward, but on these Spey flies, it's tied by the butt, gives you these really long fibers out the back. So I'm gonna now just wind this one. I've stripped it, and that'll make it a little bit easier to have these hackles. I don't have to fold it. And I'm gonna tie it on this side and come underneath for a half a wrap, and then go around again for 1.5 wraps, and then I can tie it off on my side. That puts 2 underneath and 1 on top. I might go 1 more, we'll see. Let's just bind that down really nice, and the wax will really hold that in there. That's not going anywhere. I haven't lost my scissors yet. I even found some hackle pliers, but I'm going to go without the hackle pliers. And we're just going to wind this. By stripping it, you don't need to fold the hackle. So there's 1, and there's 1.5. There's 1.5, and I've got lots of room for my head. So I'm actually going to come forward with a little bit more. I got lots of room for the head here. It's great. I haven't crowded the head at all, and I can make it look nice and blue up front. And I got lots of room. I'm going to tie off on this side, so I'm just going to strip these bottom ones off so they don't get all caught. And then just come in there like that, and she will, there we go. So there's 1 good waxy tight wrap. So 2 wraps holds it beautifully. If you start to wrap more and more times with thread, sometimes you really don't tighten things up at all, because those first 2 that really bind things down. What a lot of tires do is they go with 5 wraps, and then they'll undo 3, then put the next thing down, undo 5. So they wind 5 on and unwind 3. That way it's the first 2 tight wraps that hold everything down, and then you're being judicious with your thread wraps. And I've got a really small, nice base here to try to do the most challenging part of the fly, which is putting the wing on. And Chris has me under the gun here because I'm being videoed trying to set the wing of the hackle tip. This drives people crazy. It drives me crazy. It's not easy. So if you have trouble, don't worry, you're not alone. You're like just about everybody else that tries to set hackle tip wings. What I'll do is I'll give you a couple of tricks. Now, the first trick is to make sure that I don't have a lot of material here. I'm going to pull this down and look at it, but there's very little material on the top part here to raise my wing up in the air. So that's good. I'm going to make sure that I don't have a ramp by actually putting a few more wraps with wax on them right here. And I'm actually going to make a nice flat base. And that's another key to trying to set a really nice wing, is starting on a flat platform. And I'm just going to put 1 more wrap here on this shank. And so I've got a nice flat base there of wax, and that should hold it, but it's flat. And I brought the level up to there so that it's not a ramp. So my body was maybe here, and now I've tried to do that. Now, if you've got a really big, heavy body, you'd have to put tons of thread wraps to do that. So what you want to try to do is, again, have that pretty thin there. Is that making sense?
Chris, it does to me, but I've done this. So if it doesn't make sense to others, you guys tell us.
It's see, a wing can be ramped up in the air like this, because see how it's getting pushed up? But if I build this up like that, I can tie it on there. But the key is to try to make sure you don't have a big ramp here. So you want to have it so there's nothing that pushes it or forces it up in the air. So at this point, we have to go choose feathers. It's kind of nice to get some from the edges here. They got a bit of a curve like that and a bit of a curve like that. So what I'll do is I'll choose a feather, and I'll show you what we're going to do with it. And then I'm going to show some that, because it takes quite a bit of time here, and it'd be really boring to watch me choose 4 feathers. But what I can do is I want to get 4 feathers, And I'm going to try to get a length about there. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. And in order to do that, actually, if I put two back to back, it might be a little bit easier to see them. But this takes some time. Feather prep takes a bit of time. And so I did a bit of it early, but I'll show you that in a minute. And what I'm going to do is try to figure out, that would be way too long. That would be way too long. But I do like this one, bit of a curve. So I'm going to try to make sure the tips are completely perfectly aligned on these two. And ultimately, I'm going to want 4 because I'm going to want 2 on this side. I don't want 2 from the other side of the neck to be on that side. So what we have is 4 feathers in 2 what we call matched pairs. There's 2 here like this. And these 2 are going to go on this side. And I'm going to have 2 on that side. And they've got to be all lined up and they've got to be the right length. So this is going to be about here. So I'm going to pull these back like this. And where I used to make my mistake was I used to strip all of this off and tie it on a bare stem. And then the feathers would just twist all over and it drove me insane. And I've learned that a trick is to not strip them off, but to take your scissors and shorten that. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm going to do that. Did that show up?
Yeah, you can see the barbs left.
All right, so you can actually see what I've done there. And that now grips a bit. And I do it just more so I can hold it and so the feathers don't twist on each other. And when you tie these in, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You don't want to just tie on that bare stuff. Like, don't be afraid to actually trap just 1 or 2 fibers because that stops it from twisting. And what you'll find is you're going to have trouble because some of these are going to twist and the feathers, one wing's going to go on like that, and another one's going to go like that, and it'll drive you a little bit crazy. Some people take all 4. I'm going to just see if I can move it a little bit there. They'll take all 4 and they'll stick that down through the eye of the hook. And they'll hold all 4 together and they'll tie them all on as if it's a knife edge on top. I have trouble doing that, but that's actually what Marty Howard does. And Deck Hogan, I believe that they do it like that. Other people tie them slightly on the side of the hook like this, one pair. And then they'll come and they'll put the other pair slightly on the other side like that. I do kind of a combination where I try to set them one and then I set the other as well, but I tend not to have them totally what they call tented. And I believe I have the feathers right here. I don't, instead of me watching me do 4 feathers, which would be crazy, I actually prepared them early. And you can actually do that. You can prepare your feathers like that. These ones would be too long, but they're close enough. And I found, a match, and you can actually go through and prepare some wings. And this is almost perfect. This one right here. I did these ones earlier today just so that we weren't going too crazy watching me. I'm going to try to put these 2 on your side. I'm going to try right now. I put them where I want them. I'm going to take my fingers and hold down. I'm going to do a loose wrap. I'm going to try to get those to go, and not bad. There, that's actually not too bad. I can't believe that actually happened on the first try. It's a little bit too much my side, so I'm going to come underneath. Take it off.
That's where you get in trouble. It almost goes perfectly the first time, and you readjust, and it's not going to go back. Oh, it does, because Mike.
Don't jinx me, Chris. Anyway, Chris obviously knows what a challenge this is. And when you start doing this, it will drive you crazy, because I can't believe I'm actually doing this online and getting video doing this. Like, it's a really daring thing to do, because sometimes, you know, the nice thing about these types of flies is they take time to tie, right? You play around with it. It's kind of a crafty thing to do. Uh-oh, I got another problem there. I got a hackle that I don't like in my way here. It's kind of a crafty thing to do, to be tying these flies. And what I like is that I don't lose them very often. So I don't mind fishing them. So I don't mind like spending a lot of time on a fly that I'm going to fish, but you don't lose them very much, because you're not bottom bouncing the way that I, you know, when I used to do a lot of fishing with nymphs and egg patterns, and you know, I would lose a lot of flies. I'd tie 300, 500 flies a year, and I went crazy out there fishing, and I wouldn't mind bouncing them under log jams and everything, because that's where the fish were. So I didn't mind, you know, fishing where the fish were, and I'd have all these flies, and I'd lose them. But you don't lose these very often. You're swinging them usually about, I don't know, 1 foot underwater. And if you're in a 5 foot, if the run's 5 feet deep and the fish is down 6 inches, eyes are 6 inches to a foot off the bottom, and then you put your fly down 18 inches, that fish doesn't have very far to go. And look at that, Chris.
Gorgeous. Well done.
I can't believe that. Now I'm going to just come around the side and just make sure it's right on top.
Yeah.
But the key to that was making sure that I didn't have too much bulk here, and then actually bringing the thread base up a little bit, so that I was tying it onto something that was like that, as opposed to like that, which would cause a ramp. And I'm going to put wax here. What's that?
I was just going to say, you made it look easy, but it really was just all in the prep work there that allowed it to make it go so smoothly, right?
Yeah. It's really all about the thread base, and I did prep some feathers early, and I'm not building up a huge head here. Now one of them's twisted on me, Chris. One of them twisted on me when I tied that down. I knew it was too good to be true.
Now, while you're just correcting that, a couple of questions here. So Joe was asking if there are any specific capes that we would recommend for this kind of thing. You were saying you're just using inexpensive wapsi ones, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, sometimes I would say no. I can't recommend a particular one, other than to say, get your hands on some ones that aren't too cheap. So the wapsi ones is what I would go with. Like, in fact, this is one of those, Chris, that I got in your shop. I have the pink ones I use a lot. I make some really cool pink ones, yellow, orange, and I get them wherever, but I've bought a number of them at Drift. Yeah, they're it's great. And every one of them behaves differently. That's just the way it is. And I don't know how else to say that. Like this orange one, I'm going to try to do one in a minute, an orange one, use some orange feathers. And the orange neck that I have is beautiful, but once I get it right, but gosh, they drive me just nuts. And now the head, I haven't got too many wraps here, but there is wax on every wrap. And now I can come up with scissors and just try to get under here. I don't have great light. I usually have like a window going here.
Now, are you just trying to clip one at a time there, or you go for all of them?
Yeah, I'm going to try to get whatever I can. Actually, I can probably snip them all off there. And now what's nice is they're bound in with wax. And they're also bound in with those little barbs because I snipped it off. I didn't strip it off, which makes it really easy for them to stay in. Some people have trouble with and I used to, I would strip everything off and then I wouldn't use enough wax, like this hard tires wax. Do you guys sell that in the shop, Chris? It's like,
yeah, we do.
Do you use little vineyard cakes?
I find is too soft. Yeah, they make one. There's a whole bunch of brands. The one we have right now, I think it's kind of a no-name brand, but it works well.
I like this, just these little cakes of hard tires wax. And I mean, it lasts absolutely forever. I've had 2 of them for 1,000 years. And, it seems it's just a great thing to have. And some people try to do it with Overton's Wonder Wax and or dubbing wax. And it's just too slippery and too sticky. What I want is a thread to actually never slide downhill. And so if you tie it in with good hard wax, your thread just goes exactly where you want. And I'm going to come around, just cover those butts like that on that one. And then I'm going to come back and cover those. And I'm golden. I've got a little bit more thread there. I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's a small little head done with a whip finish. And with all that wax in there, you can literally get right in here with your fingers and just work the wax into the head of your fly. And that's what people do with salmon flies. They don't often even trim everything perfectly. They just work the wax with their fingers. I was, a guy the other day online was telling me he spends 5 minutes working his fingers of the wax to get everything tight and bound and smooth. And then you could even probably take a hair dryer and heat that up, and that would really melt the wax in. And I don't know if that's a little, there's a tiny, tiny thing that's bugging me there. I need these scissors. Chris, I got those great scissors in the shop the other day, those ones you told me about, those razors, but they're in Toronto. I couldn't take them on the plane to get them here.
Of course.
And that's it.
It's gorgeous.
That's it. And it's just, some people would say they'd like that wing a hair shorter. But I'm happy with that. I mean, really, like around, what you're looking for is no further than the curve of the hook, right? No further than the bend. And that is a really good fishing fly. It's a really good fishing fly. Right. Now you can finish that off with varnish or whatever you choose to do. But there we go. I'm not going to finish that off with varnish until maybe tomorrow.
That's awesome. So a couple questions before we move on. So yeah, Joe, I think we just answered your question about using some kind of adhesive on the head. So yeah, that would definitely make things durable. But like you say, Mike, I mean, wax, once it gets cold out, and like just as soon as it touches the water, it goes pretty well rock hard. So theoretically, if you had enough wax, you could probably get away pretty well with just that. But varnish.
Yeah, I think that the adhesive that holds these in is the wax and the tension of the thread. Mm-hmm. The problem with just using wax and finishing is it doesn't give a hard coating and it wears off. And then your thread can start to fray. So what people do is that then they'll use some kind of a varnish, or I think, Chris, you use head cement. Some people use nail polish, but head cement is probably, or just, regular fly finishing cement. Nothing's fancy. Everybody's got a different one that they use. Some people use the Loon Cure. It goes on and then you harden it up with Loon when you're done. With UV. I haven't done that. I always worry that I like to be able to undo things, because what'll happen to me is I'll look at this and it'll bug me about 3 weeks later, and I'll very fine. I can just take a scalpel. I can make one little slit underneath there and I can just peel that off and lift it without damaging anything else. And I can just reset it. But I don't like my heads to be set too hard that way, so I tend to use wax and then just some varnish.
Yep, terrific. To a different Joe, yes, it is specifically the neck capes. You don't want to use saddle hackle for these things. The stems are too thin, so they twist, and they don't have the right curvature, and the hackles themselves aren't stable enough to stay on top of the feather. They get all twisted.
Yeah, saddle. some people, if you're doing huge flies and you could find, some saddle tips, you might be able to, but generally you want a rooster cape. A hen cape can be nice too if you can find one with thin like feathers. Like hen capes can be often like fatter feathers.
Yes, for big flies.
But they do go on quite nicely. One of the nicest capes I have, is actually from a chicken that a friend of mine harvested, and we ate it when I was duck hunting in Manitoba one year. And he said, let's go get a chicken from the backyard, because he had a farm. And I said, oh, that's a beautiful chicken. And I actually have the neck downstairs, and it was a hen. And I've done some coast oranges with it. It's actually really cool, but it happened to be on the sort of thinner side of a hen, right? But rooster ones have this really nice sort of look to them.
Yeah,
they're the right ones. So saddle, no. And well, you don't want to buy like rooster saddle strung stuff either, because you can't find 4 matching ones. You want 2 to be perfectly matching the other 2, and you need pretty much to get a neck to do that. Yep. And you get a lot of flies out of a neck, right?
Oh, yeah.
Get a lot of flies out of a neck, right? So we could try another.
Yeah, sorry, a couple more here. Joe's following up. Seems like many of the rooster capes I see are for dry flies. Feathers are too thin. So what you want to find, Joe, is something called a streamer rooster neck. It's basically just kind of the lower grade ones. They're usually, so Wapsi makes them. We sell them in the shop. Usually they're labeled something like a streamer rooster neck, and those are much broader feathers and much less expensive too. So I don't think whiting really makes one that fits the bill. Like a bugger pack might work, but the feathers are kind of thin. An American saddle is actually a pretty thick stem thing, so those actually might work.
I've seen the white people have bought whiting American rooster necks, and they're streamer necks, but they're difficult to work with because, like I said, they got like that really stiff center thing. Yeah. So I think you're right, Chris. Like a lower grade Chinese. I think the Wapsi ones are just Chinese necks, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know why they call them that, but I've seen them called that. I thought they were called streamers, but yeah, a Chinese neck is usually the same thing. Yeah,
because I think they came out of chickens from China, and there's also Indian necks that are a little smaller.
Yeah.
I thought.
No, that's my experience too. I don't know why, if it's a different breed of chicken or what.
Yeah.
So Chinese neck or a just a rooster or streamer neck is what you want.
The ones this right here that I'm going to actually use on my next fly is a Wapsi streamer neck from your shop.
Yeah, cool.
And so's the pink one that I use a lot, and so's the yellow one that I use quite a bit. So,
and then we also had a question about steaming feathers. Do you ever, because some of these feathers come a little twisted off the neck, do you ever play around with steaming them?
I'm going to show you that right now. Actually, on the next fly, I was going to actually address that. Okay, so this right here is schlappen. And there's a big twist in this schlappen feather. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to actually do anything with that until you get it nice and straight. And there's no way to get that out except just steam it. And I have a kettle. Listen, that's me hitting my kettle. It's right on my time desk. And I steam things all the time, especially if there's like little twists. Sometimes if you got dirt on them. But absolutely, this feather right here, I steamed off before I stripped it. It was as twisted up as this one, and I believe this one was also twisted. And I did this prep just before I did this to show you that these feathers were both as badly twisted each other, and this one looks great now because I steamed it. So, absolutely, I have a kettle on the desk going, without much water in it, so I can just hit a button and have it go pretty quickly. Okay, you want to start another one, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to, I don't know, are you going to actually show the steaming process, or do you want to just quickly explain?
I can do that. Like, it's basically a kettle, and I just turn it on, and once it's really boiling, I pull it right across the mouth of my kettle like this. And I do that with all kinds of things. With, like, if I have trouble setting a wing that's like a married wing, just pull it across. If you buy some bronze mallard and it's all kind of unmarried, and so you just pull it through the steam like this quite a bit. And then once it's, the twists on this would just come right out as soon as you steam it. And then you just stroke it with your fingers, and you can get almost anything back into shape by doing that. It's actually exactly that. You just pull it right across the steam, but don't get your fingers in there because it's really hot. Okay. That's a good question. Yeah. Steam and wax are very important things around the tying bench. And water. Another tip, sometimes just to help your flies, to help that base go on without all twisting up, if you moisten the base here, this is another set of hackle tips. If you moisten the base here, and then just, there's a tiny drop of water in the bottom there, and you can just put it in a little shot glass and just moisten up the tips. You don't want to soak the whole feather, because then you start to have trouble with seeing it, but that's one way to do it. I don't like to use spit. I've heard, the old people say moisten with saliva, but I try not to do that. There's all kinds of chemicals probably in the dye. Besides, it's not a nice thing to do, but you can just get a shot glass out and just moisten those. I would let them sit there for 15 minutes, before I was taught. If I'm going to do a bunch, I put them in a bit of water and just moisten them. And then you'll find that they actually go in quite nicely if they've been just sort of moistened. The stems aren't quite as brittle, and they don't, like, the thread binds into them a little bit better, I think. Do you do that as well, Chris?
Sorry, I was muted. I use a lot of water and things. I haven't really played around with just moistening the stems. I'll have to. Yeah. Joe asked, would a hair iron work if we don't have steam? I'm not sure if he means a hair dryer or actually like a hair iron. Probably not. If it was an iron, you would singe it badly. You'd burn it. If it was a hair dryer, I still don't think it would. Part of the key is to get that moisture into the feather, and it sort of springs it back to life. These feathers are, for the most part, straight on a bird before they're harvested. And when they get twisted, it's when they're in the pack, sitting in the pack, they get a little twisted, pressed up against the side of it. And so you're just kind of bringing it back to its natural shape. That really requires that water to spring it back up.
You could use a hair dryer after you've made a fly like this. If you wanted to try to shape it a bit, I guess you could use a hair dryer, and certainly that would heat this up and melt that wax in. Yeah. But I don't think I'd use, like you say, Chris, a curling iron kind of hair.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
it'd probably damage the feather, right?
Yeah. The other thing to note as well, you can do, it doesn't really make a difference because you're going to do this while you fish it as well. But if you just want it to look nice, I'll do a lot of the time, and it doesn't substitute just setting that wing correctly anyways, but you can kind of water set these things too. So I'll often, after I've tied it and done, just kind of run it under a warm, like, stream of water under a tap, and then and just lay it on a flat piece of glass or whatever. And when it dries, it'll have a little bit more of an accentuated kind of curve. But that's just for your own liking. Once you start fishing it, it's going to do that anyways. So.
Yeah. I think it's, like you say, it's trying to choose ones that have maybe a bit of a natural curve, and then trying to set them using some, the techniques that I was trying to show you, of tapering down the front of your body, and then making sure you have enough room and you're not crowded at the head, and you can just then maybe slightly build up a little flat platform of thread to make sure that you're tying your wing down on a flat platform. Those are pretty key things. So how are we doing? Should I do another one, Chris?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So we're going to do a Mahoney. Now there's one little other trick here, is that this one actually uses floss. And so I have to be a bit more careful with my technique, because floss bodies can look awful, or they can look fantastic. And it's all about what is underneath the floss. If you wrap floss onto a bumpy underneath, or what they call the underbody, then your floss will just be bumpy and it will look kind of messy. But when you look at some of these really beautiful flies that you see that people tie, it's because they've really taken some care to do an underbody. And you can spend, there's pages written on just how to do an underbody, but we're going to keep things again really quite simple here. And sorry, I didn't mean to leave that hook in there, Chris. Sorry, that's a Mahoney. And a Mahoney is a Deck Hogan pattern. Deck Hogan's a really famous West Coast steelheader. And it's really very similar to what I just did, in the sense that it's that traditional body, but he's going to do floss at the back, and then he's going to do seal up here at the front. And it's orange. Actually, sorry, it's red. This is what he likes to call my red steelhead fly, but it's fire red. And sometimes it's hard to find a fire red cape. I've got this sort of deeper red cape, but it doesn't seem to be red enough for me or bright enough for me. So what I do is I just sandwich some orange in between the red. And if you actually start to mix some of the things that you buy, you can get some great colors. And it's fire red seal fur. And so what I did was I mixed a little bit of orange seal fur into some red. And I've got this beautiful sort of fire red here. And then if I take two orange hackles and put them on the inside, and then two red ones and have them on the outside. So my matching pairs are now red, orange, I can get this great look. And then instead of red guinea at the front, I went with red schlappen, which is, they call for red schlappen and then red guinea. And I went with red schlappen and then some orange guinea. So it's a little bit orangey red. That's my way, only because I don't have the actual colors fire red, but you don't need them. You can play around and do anything you want with this Mahoney. Like the traditional one, again, is red like this. It's black hackle, and then floss body, red seal. And then he ribs it with, instead of silver tinsel, he uses pearl mylar. And then he puts the oval behind it and then hackles it just the way we did before. And there's no heron in this one at all. So the only challenge here is trying to do a nice floss body. And there's a number of different ways to do that. I think I'm going to probably try to do the simplest. But this is what we're going to build. This is a Mahoney right here. It's a great fly. And you can do them in almost any color. I've seen them purple winged. You can play around with it, but it's basically the same thing that we're doing. So I'm going to use white thread on this. You can sort of see what I'm doing, maybe a little bit better. And I'm going to start right here, okay, in the middle. And I've got to figure out how I want to do this, because there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I'm going to tie down my tinsels first. And here's my oval. And here is, this is a pearlescent mylar. And I find it trickier to use because it's see-through and I can barely see it. And right up here, I'm going to tie these in. And of course, this is the one I wrap first. This is the flat. So it's going to be closest to you. And I'm putting this right here. I'm going to try to make sure I don't get this all too tangled. Oh, it's too long and twisty. There. I know I'm not tying it at the back of the fly. Okay. And then that should be closest to me. And then a little further away from me. There we go, goes the oval. And then what's gonna go is my hackle. And this hackle is going to be black, right? So here's one right here. I didn't prep these. Actually, this one's nice and wet still. Here we go. I should probably use a dry one. I was going to soak that, but it's still wet, unfortunately. And if it's too wet, it can mess up my, I'm going to pull it through my pant leg to dry it. If it's too wet, that can cause me some problems. But I'm going to now, where am I going to tie this one in? Right here. I actually prepped this one really well. I'm going to pull those off there. Now this one, I'm going to look for some length to be, I'm going to guide where I see my hackles beginning, back there. And I'm going to just tie that in. That should be, well, everything's getting a little bit messed up now, sorry. Let's come back here.
So am I seeing that right, Mike? Do you have the order of those reversed from the?
No, I don't know. It's hard for me to figure out right now. Okay. But whatever's closest to me, on my, yeah, this should have gone on this side, right? Whatever's closest to me, I'm gonna wrap first. I'm gonna wrap last. It's always easy when you get tired at the end of the day. So the one that's gonna be furthest from me is this oval. And I wrap that first. That's the, sorry, the flat is furthest from me. And I'm gonna wrap that first. It's just tricky because like you get the hook upside down and I'm gonna try to come really smooth, wrap by wrap, all the way back. And tie that in, and make sure that they all go where I want, like this. Okay. The last one. That one should be closest to me. If I wrap it first, I always get tired, Chris. There we go. There we go. Having trouble. Let's just do this. There we go. And this one will spread out there. Trying to keep them totally beside each other. I'm going to worry about that hackle stem in a bit. Here we go. There we go. All the way back. And I'm getting them right beside each other. I actually am. And that's the tedious part about doing some of these, is it takes a long time to get things absolutely flat. And it's all about patience. And so that's good. I'm going to not go any further than that. Now, I'm going to actually come back forward and put them all right beside each other all the way forward too. And I should have a really nice flat base there. Sometimes if you're getting really fancy, you can even buy some other things that actually build up smooth underbodies, but that should be good enough. And now I'm going to put some silk floss on here. Sorry, this is just regular rayon floss. You can use any floss you want. I just have the floss that I've been left with over the years, and I've got a way too long a piece here, but that's fine. And I'm going to tie this on here. I could probably use this long piece in a bit. Now, maybe I will use this. It's twisted right out on me. Look at that. I didn't use wax. If you don't use wax, things slip. And that was my mistake when I didn't wax that properly. If I wax this, then it won't slip out with those wraps. Okay. I don't know if you can see that in focus, but it's fairly smooth. And I'm now gonna, the camera's a little bit in my way. So I will come up here like this, get this out of the way. And I'll try to do this using a rotary technique. Get things out of the way. But I'm just gonna wrap this floss like this. Normally I use my fingers to do this, but this is working well. And if I come back once, and I'm gonna go back over top of my floss. And it should be nice and smooth.
Couple of quick questions for you there, Mike. You mentioned that you're tying with white thread, so it's easier for us to see, but even if we weren't watching, would you still go with white thread under that floss?
The brighter the color, the more I use white. And so this is a bright floss, so I would use white. If you use black thread, it darkens the floss, especially when it gets wet. Sid Glasso on his orange heron used to actually paint his hook shanks with whiteout, which is really neat because he liked to keep things really bright. Then he started to put a flat tinsel tag, and he did the flat tinsel tag completely up underneath the floss body. And so you'll see that on an orange heron.
Yeah, so he would wrap the entire shank with silver mylar, but then leave a little bit exposed?
Not the entire shank, but the rear third.
Sure, yeah,
which was the entire shank of what he wanted with floss now. What I am not used to doing.
And then secondly, Mike, because I feel like some people might try to do it, would there be any reason not to put that floss on a bobbin?
Yes. Yeah. If you put it on a bobbin, it twists as it goes on and it won't go on flat.
Yeah.
And that's it. Just there's to do really good floss work. Don't use a bobbin. To just put some floss on, and you want to put floss tight, and it will almost look like it's ribbed, you can use a bobbin, absolutely. But the other thing is, it frays so easily, and so bobbins can fray it.
Yeah. So the other thing I was going to mention is just seeing how you were holding that floss. It's a little tougher with silk than rayon, but like just how far away you were holding, and you weren't readjusting your grip with that floss. You just kind of held it and wrapped, right?
Yeah, like if you are going to wrap like this, your fingers will fray it. And some people even wear silk gloves when they do their floss work, like really good professional tyers. I don't. And if I've been fishing a lot, it drives me crazy, because you know how your fingers get really rough. Mm-hmm. And it just frays everything just brutally. Yeah, floss is tricky, but that's not bad. That's flat. Now, some people will then actually come along and take a smooth thing like this and what they call burnish the floss, and it flattens out all the little bumps, any little imperfection. But there's really no substitute for making sure that you've got a really, really, smooth underbody. I rushed that one a little bit, but it's not bad. If I'm doing my own, I'll actually sit down and I'll spend an evening just working on maybe the floss body. Sometimes the flies, like, some of these flies, I don't like to tie them all in one night, or sometimes I'll just do the tail of one and then next day, and it'll be in the vise for a couple of days, because we don't always have a lot of time to tie, right? So I just putt around and say, okay, I'll start one and then work on the body or work on the wing another day. So because I like to do a fly. if I get one done every 3 days, you can get quite a few flies in your box over a little while, especially when you're not losing them, right? So
yeah, like I know you're not making that up either, because I know you've had the issue the last couple of years of just running out of space to put flies and having less and less need to tie.
I got a lot of flies. I actually I don't like to sell them. I don't like to sell flies. As soon as it comes to that, I don't get a lot of enjoyment, but I have some friends that really like them. And if I have some that are extras, I don't like to sell them, but they go, how about we trade? And they trade me some like nice bottles of wine and I put them in the cellar or something like that. But anyway, I left this really long for a reason, because you can, if you want, with floss, you can split it and you can actually do a little dubbing loop and put some dubbing on there. And what I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to actually just put some dubbing right onto this silk like this. I'm going to actually put some wax on this floss. I call it silk regardless of what it is. It's just floss. Sometimes it's silk, sometimes it's rayon. And I'm going to dub right onto here. It actually doesn't go on badly onto silk. And some of the original tires, this is how they did their transition to a seal body, was they dubbed it onto the silk like this, and just spin it a little bit, and then just wound it on. And I'm going to just tighten that a bit. It's not going on great, but let's just see. Hopefully I'm not going to get too close to the camera there. Actually, I'll do this again. Here we go. And the nice thing about this is it covers up most of the white by using kind of some floss. There we go. There we go. I'm going to use a lot more. Eventually, I'm going to make a dubbing loop, but I'm just putting some of this right on now. I'm going to let that hang. I got one little gap, but I'm not going to go back and fix it because we're doing a demo here. We're not trying to get everything perfect. And there you go. So that's the idea of how to do a floss body and transition it to a fur body, is you can actually keep that floss smooth and then don't cut off the end, and then you can actually put the dubbing right onto some seal. I'm not going to change flosses, colors of thread. I might have gone to red here, Chris. I might have gone to red to try to make it like, so it doesn't show underneath. But there's no need to do that right now. It'd just be a change of time. It would just take extra time. So I'm going to do that. And then here, I'm just going to make a dubbing loop, I think. And then we'll just put some bright red seal on here. And again, you can see if I had red thread, it would be a little better. I'm not going to worry too much. Make it a little thicker here. Actually, I don't have too far to go, so. I don't have too far to go.
Yeah, but it just hit me the way that you're doing your dubbing loop. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Before you make the loop, you're dubbing the dubbing onto a single length of thread, which then becomes one side of the loop.
Yeah, I do that when I'm doing fur.
Yeah, just I wouldn't more easily.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that if I was trying to put like sandwich some ostrich and things into a dubbing loop. I wouldn't do that, but for this, yeah, I put it on and then twist it up.
Mm-hmm.
Now neat. I don't want to go any further than that. Like I don't want to go any further than that. So I'm going to just try to strip here. There. And I have really tapered my body down. You can see that body is really tapered down. That's the key. I don't want it to be this fat up here. I've got it kind of tapering down. So now we're going to go flat, right? The flat's got to go, oh, I'm all tangled. My flat goes first. I gotta get it out of there. Okay. So here we go. Flat goes first. 1, 2, and it's almost impossible to see this stuff. 3, 4, 5. It's almost impossible to see flat mylar because it's see-through. It's like wrapping a window on it, but it gives it kind of a neat glow and keeps the whole body red. So it's kind of a neat idea. Then we're going to go right on the edge of it. We're going to go with our oval, but it's harder to see and do this without a gap because it's so, with silver tinsel, it's very easy to do this. But there we go. Now I got this coming up here. And there's a gap. There we go. I'm going to undo some wraps here. I got way too many wraps. And I'm going to go there. There's a bit of a salvage there, Chris. Did you see that?
It was pretty slick. It was a good save.
Yeah.
I was wondering as you're just burning thread wraps off there if you remembered. I
went one too many, undid, and then I could just see that mylar starting to come undone. So there you have it. So Chris, do you sit down and tie two? Like I don't often do 2 flies like this in one night. Like
I've done it. It's not
what?
My favorite. I've done it. It's not my favorite thing to do, but
yeah, because it's like
you
I don't like it to become work. I don't like it to become work. Some people like tie professionally and give them away. And okay, you can pick around with a dubbing brush, or I like a toothbrush sometimes just to pluck that out, give it a little brush. And then we're going to come along and we have to decide if we want to do, yeah, let's do 1 turn at the back end again. A lot of tires like to do that. And then we're going to come right up under here like this. And you see how they stick forward? But then they'll curve back beautifully. That's what I love about this style of spay tying, like these traditional old river spay patterns. You know, the river spay had very drab patterns, and the river D had flies with its own style, right? D style fly. We should do some D style flies one night.
That'd be a fun one.
Yeah, I could do some D winging.
It's cool. In fact, look back, there are some flies that had, you know, certain variations for certain rivers too, whether or not it actually mattered.
Yeah, yeah. And there we have the makings of a Mahoney. And right here, I might change threads just because I'm going to put some red hackle down, and I'd like to put it over red thread instead of white. Now this thread, the only red that I have is not veevus. I've been using 10-aught veevus, which I've really started to like. The 12 sometimes frays on me a little bit. I like to use 6-aught for bigger flies, like pike flies and things. Brook trout, big. When I say brook trout flies, my brook trout flies are pretty big. But this 10-aught veevus is one I really started to go to. And I'm just changing threads here to something that frays a little bit more easily. So I have to be a bit more careful, but there we go. So I'm gonna wax this. Now I'm gonna do 2 collars here. That red, where'd that red schlappen that here we go. Here's the red schlappen that I prepped. Now, this is neat. I stripped the left side this time. If you're tying it from the butt, you want to strip the right side. If you're tying from the tip, you want to strip the left side. If you're a right-handed tyer, if that helps. There. Did you see some more glare there, Chris? I knocked off my cover.
Yeah, I saw it fall. You know what? The glare doesn't seem to be an issue, so I wouldn't worry about it.
So I won't worry about it, okay. So there's tied in the bright red hackle. Now I wish it was brighter, so I'm gonna use an orange guinea, but I'm just putting some red schlappen here, and I'm gonna do a few quicker wraps. There we go. I want it to be pretty red, so I'll do one more turn because I stripped it, right? You can do a little bit more turns if you strip it, and they tend to lay down a little nicer. If you don't strip it, you have to fold your hackle. So I'm a little bit pushed for room here, Chris. Can you see? I gotta be a little more careful on this one. In fact, I'm gonna come back one wrap, and it's a little dangerous, but I need the room. I'm gonna put my orange guinea. Here we go. And again, guinea is really difficult to work with. So you want to try to find one. This is a nice big one that I prepped earlier, and it's got beautiful orange bars. And so I'm going to get lots of orange, got big, big, big dots on it. And I stripped again the left side because I'm going to tie this one in from the point. And it's got a fairly thin center. Some of them have a pretty thick center, and guinea can be tricky to work with. But what's great about guinea is it goes on, and the fibers actually give some support, and they don't collapse the same way that schlappen does. So they'll stay like this, and they'll create a little bit of a vortex. And there's a reason that a lot of the old tyers would hackle guinea in front of their spay flies, and also the other thing that they use a lot is teal and gadwall. There we go. I'm almost out of room here. I might have crowded the head a little on this one, but we will figure it out. I crowded the head more than I would like, but I've got room. I've just got room, but I'm not quite where I want to be. So there's the guinea now. And again, we're going to try to wing this one. That's going to be fun. And I'm going to wing it with this thread too. This thread's great thread, but I prefer the veevus by a mile. I like the color of this. It breaks. So I'm now waxing my thread, and I'm being really conscious about making sure that I don't have a big ramp here. So I'm checking it out, and I need a few more thread wraps right here, not many, just to make sure that I've got enough built up that I'm flat. Okay, there we go. And I want to tie it right there. So I should somewhere have done the same thing. I've basically this time got, there's half of a wing. And there's an orange feather and a red feather on the outside. And they would go there. That's too long, do you see? So I'd have to play around. And then I got the other half of the wing here. So these are ones that I've done earlier, but this one, I think I even got the length right, so that I'm not going to be sitting here messing around in front of you for an hour trying to get the length right. So this is much better. I got these two prepared here so that we're not bored. So you're not bored watching me. We'll try to do this, Chris. But this is going to be much more of a challenge for me because the orange feather I have, loves to twist. It's just not as friendly as the hackle I was using earlier. And that's what I think I meant by every neck is different, and some necks just drive you crazy. And it's not like you're going to go and sell it. You can't take it back, right? So you got to just kind of get to know your material. I'm going to try to make this work. Let's see. Wish me luck. I think it's going to twist.
You got it.
Not quite. Don't forget, get your fingers on here. And wax is a wonderful thing. Okay. So there's my left side. Some people do all four at once. I like to do each side separately. I'm going to trap a few fibers here. And that's knifed on. That one's a little bit off center. Get in there with my fingers. And not bad, but not great. It's you got to get in there and don't be afraid to. What did one person say? Don't take crap from your materials.
Good.
It's a little long, but I'm gonna stay with it. And yeah, I'm actually pleased. I'm actually not. That's not too bad. Not too bad, considering I did that very quickly. You know what? I think we'll shorten it. I got time, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then I'm going to just move the whole wing like that. That might even just do it. Because I sort of manipulated them into place, I was able to just sort of slide them through, right? There. And I can't pull that too tight. There's tons of wax holding that in. There. There's one feather that's a touch longer than the other because I didn't spend like an hour lining the tips up at the beginning. And I'll just come in there and take those off. And you're seeing a lot of my big fat thumbs, sorry. But one thing is you have to sort of hold things in place. I don't know if you can see that. But when I go to trim things, I put my fingers right on the wing so it doesn't move when I trim.
And not just on the wing, but really where it's tied in, right?
Yeah, like right behind where it's tied in. And I grab everything. And almost sometimes it's a vice grip. Like you don't want things to slip, right? So now I can pretty much just another big pile of wax on there. I'm going to put one wrap there. I still think I can just trim those off just a little better. I sometimes use a scalpel and just go in with a scalpel. And I'm going to do that. And almost sort of some figure eights. And if I didn't have wax on the thread, there's no way I could ever do kind of like figure eight wraps because they would just slide off of each other. But doing a figure eight kind of places wax all over. And I'm going to just now do a little whip finish here. 1, 2, 3, and I only need 4 because I got an awful lot of wax in there. There we go. That's not bad. And then I'm going to come in here, cut that off, and then lots of work with my fingers on that head. Push all that wax right into the head. And those feathers are just bound in with that wax as if they're embedded in a candle. And they won't come out, especially if like it gets really cold, right? And if I wanted to, I could just heat that up with a hairdryer and then it would just melt right in everywhere. But anyway, so there's there's a pretty rushed Mahoney, but there's a Mahoney.
Gosh, that's awful good.
And you can do that that fly in an assortment of colors.
Yeah.
Like I've seen purple ones done, which are really cool. Purple Mahonies. I've done pink ones, like lots of pink. I fish a lot of pink here too.
Yeah, these are great platforms. Like say, if you look at a lot of these kind of spay flies, a lot of them kind of follow a very similar anatomy, right? So you can just kind of swap colors and things and make some stuff up.
And I think what I was doing was too, I was trying to give some basic kind of ideas as to, tips in terms of how you can approach these flies. And from there you can go. I'll put a couple of other ones up. I don't know. Here's one that's done very similar. It's a really, really cool fly, right? This is just white. And at this time I did 4 white ones and then just 2 very small hackle tips just off to one side of it. And then this is on a purple base. And this one has a little bit of a tail, right? And then my floss body underneath, right? But they're all done very similarly. And another thing you can do, here's one that's the same, except they didn't use hackle tips from a rooster on this one. This is...
they used an even more annoying material.
That's golden pheasant breast, done the same way. And this fly is actually a really famous fly, and it's called a Solduc Spey, which is yellow, orange with golden pheasant, right? This is a really famous steelhead fly, Sid Glasso fly. And if you don't want to use a hackle tip, I just did basically the same thing. I didn't put a tail on this one either, but I just did this one up this morning just when I was practicing to make sure that the video worked. And I thought, well, I made a pink one. And then instead of putting a hackle tip, I put 2 pieces of turkey tail that I set in what they call Murdoch style. There's different ways to set D-wings, and I set these delta. I set them kind of D-wing, like that sort of Murdoch style.
Yeah, a lot more vertical, right?
And then I just put some jungle cock on the front and put a teal throat on it. And this is heron, actually. I put a collar of heron that I bought in the shop that was dyed hot pink, and I haven't used it yet. I think I bought that like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago in your shop, but I just haven't got around to using it. And that's actually a really cool fly.
Yeah,
I think it's going to fish really, really well. I'm excited to fish it. So once you get, started on this, there's a number of different things you can do and learn to do. But again, don't get frustrated if setting your wings at first is difficult. It just takes practice. And the key, again, is to try to minimize the bulk and then leave yourself enough room and then build a flat base to set the wings on. And if they don't go perfect the first time, fiddle with them. Sometimes you can moisten them. Try setting them, all at once. Try setting 2 and then the other 2. And what you don't want is a wing that sticks up in the air like that. You will see that. You can go online and see people's like hackle tips, and some of them are sticking straight up like that. And then you'll see these other beautiful ones, and they're just laid back beautifully. Some of the nicest ones ever are done by Sean Dahlquist. And he's actually posting on Spay pages now, Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some of his very nice stuff for sure.
Yeah, he's probably one of the best sort of West Coast steelhead fly tires. he was a student of McNeese, who actually builds, made some of these hooks, right? But again, AJ 1.5, it's the AJ 2051 1.5s. I wouldn't go smaller than a 3. The smaller you go, the more trouble you'll have. They can become more and more challenging to set the wings as you get smaller. And I find actually the 1.5 is the nicest one to fish, and the 3. But I think it's probably best to go with the 1.5s. The 3/0 is an even bigger hook, but I just think it's too big.
It's a lot. It's a lot of weight, and
yeah,
a lot of harm to the fish's mouth, it seems to.
Yeah. It's just a great big long thing. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Mike. And yeah, well, hopefully we'll get you back again.